Hello, I'm Tripp Babbitt of the Stats Detectives. In this, our second episode, Dr. Frony Ward and I take a look at the unemployment rate and the number of non-farm jobs added.
So what was the reason that we're looking at these data today?
Okay, the data we're looking at today is called jobs added.
Okay.
Jobs added actually represent the change in the number of non-farm people employed.
Okay.
That is a particular line in the economic data that are used a lot and can be summarized. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is the place where I go get most of the data because there's lots and lots of data series there and they're fairly easy to access. You can get some of these numbers in other places as well. Okay. So I will refer to the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Okay, and why did this get your attention?
It got my attention. I've been paying attention to the number of jobs added, and typically the discussions are, oh, they're more than expected, or they're not as much as expected, and sometimes when the number of jobs added is down below 200,000, it's down in the neighborhood of 170,000, people seem to wring their hands about it. At the same time, the other data value that's mentioned is the unemployment rate.
Okay. And
the unemployment rate being unchanged at 4.1% in February. So what we have are these two numbers are often talked about together. Added so many jobs, the unemployment rate almost, and I'm in a sense probably suggesting something that may or may not exist, but it's a lot of times the talk is about these two numbers almost as if you expect one or the other to help you understand the other one. Okay. You know, we add a lot of jobs, maybe unemployment goes down. We don't add as many jobs, maybe unemployment goes up, and that is not what happens.
Okay.
So I go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and kind of look at these things over time. Part of what I do is pay attention not just to a single number. This can get us into a lot of trouble, paying attention to a particular number. This number's bigger than we expected or smaller than we expected, and make meaning out of it. But our economy is not a one-day event or a one-month event. Our economy is something that's constantly moving around. It has a dynamic behavior to it.
Okay.
So no one day or 1 month can give us a sense of how our economy behaves. So I go back and get the data and take a look at what do these series of numbers show me over time. So there's a little background of what I'm curious about.
Okay, and in particular, you had mentioned in a conversation with me about the fact that the numbers went up to 313,000, and that kind of set you on this. When did that happen? Where was that number from?
That number was the difference between the January employment number of non-farm employees and the February number
of 2018.
Of 2018.
Okay.
That's exactly right.
All right.
That's right.
Okay, so let's take a look at some of the data that you've analyzed here.
Yeah. When I take a look at the data, sometimes I'll go back a number of years. I went back 20 years for these data to begin with.
Any reason that you picked 20 years?
I just picked 20 years.
Okay.
I mean, 20 years seems to encompass a lot of things. So,
okay, all right.
And 1998 was, to some extent, the 1990s had a behavior with the technology boom, et cetera. And there were lots of different kinds of things going on. So I thought we'll catch the tail end of that, the last 3 years of the 90s and the technology boom, and then in through the 2000s where we had a really crazy behavior with the housing crisis and our recession. And then how have we recovered? So it covered a time period where people may be more or less familiar with a number of these events. I find if I go back to the 80s or even earlier, I don't have in my gut feeling of some of the things that happened. I can maybe recall some of them, but the last 20 years, many of us will have a sense of how did that play in our lives.
Okay. So let's take a look at this first chart that you put together here. What is it telling us?
The first chart that we have is the jobs added by month from January 1998 to February 2018. And these are non-farm jobs added. And I have broken the time periods up into times that seem to be relatively stable. Now, what do I mean by stable? Obviously, we always have bouncing around of numbers from one time to the next. The numbers do have variability to them, or noise. But it's kind of like static on something. There's oftentimes a background noise that is a given amount, and it's always there, that background noise. So from January of 1998 up until sometime into the 2000s, you see that we have a noisy bouncing around of the jobs added, a positive number. It could be 260,000 jobs added. And that is a pretty steady amount of added jobs over that period of time. That was a very, very exciting economic time for our country. And those of you who want to explore what was going on in the 1998 to the late 2000s or into the 2000s, there was a lot of technology boom going on. And so we did have an exciting time.
Yeah, we had Priceline, we had Amazon kicking off, we had a number of internet companies that kicked off from a retail standpoint. Yep. Yes,
we had all kinds of fun stuff going on. The next time period that seems relatively stable is in the early 2004 to, I cut it off to the end of 2007, or maybe at the end of the summer 2007. But that number was about 159,000 jobs added during that time, so not nearly the same level of what was going on. In the early 2000s, late 2001 after 9/11, and then into 2002, 2003, we had a real dip and then beginnings of climbing back to jobs added. You see in the January 2008 time period over to 2000, down to about 2009, an incredible drop down to the negative numbers. We were losing jobs at an amazing rate. And that was the housing crisis and the subsequent recession and the banking collapses, etc. We started to pull out in 2009 a bit, but the recovery itself was not very fast. We came up into 2010, began to recover, a little bit rocky there. Starting January 2012, though, we see that we have a fairly steady rate of jobs added each month, a positive number. We do have variability, but it is a fairly stable. You can almost count on an average of about a little over 200,000 jobs added by month on the average. So that's what I see in this particular this first chart that we've got.
Okay, so basically from 2012 to 2018, it's been pretty stable. It looks like from during that time period. You know, looks like we're adding 205,000 or so jobs month over month.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Now,
and in between the limits, meaning between the red line that we see and the red line on top, which is the upper control limit, and the lower control limit, we can expect anywhere between, those are thousands, probably a loss of 11,000 jobs to as many as 422,000, and that we can expect it to be in that range before we start to notice anything unusual based on, that things are getting better.
Yeah. What you will notice across this whole 20 years is that the month-to-month bouncing around, the month-to-month noise, the month-to-month variability, whatever term strikes you as most helpful to understand what's going on. We will always have, in a dynamic economy, changes that go on from month to month. The question becomes, are those changes indicative of a phenomenon that's really a huge issue with our economy? And from 2012 to 2018, or 2012 to the end of 2017, these bouncing around, the month-to-month changes are essentially a noisy part of our economy. We get, there's ups and downs and this and that, but no real major upset to our economy one way or the other. You have to go back, and one of the reasons to have this whole series from 1998 to 2018 is to show that, yes, you can pick up major changes in the economy. Okay. Things like 9/11 at the end of 2001, things like our housing crisis and the resulting banking crisis. Those things are major events above and beyond just the noisiness of our economy from month to month, and you can see them play out across these 20 years.
Okay. All right. Let's move to the second chart that you have.
The second chart is about I've taken the data that are plotted on the first chart, starting at January 2012 and going up through the 313,000, which was jobs added in February of 2018.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to the other chart just to highlight it for people that what you're representing. So now we've taken really the last part of your first chart and moved it to the second chart.
Yes, I wanted to highlight that over these 5 years we had essentially no major events that dominated that really moved our economy off a steady state, in a sense. The fact that we have 2006 on the average, 2006,000 jobs added per month doesn't mean that every month we're going to have 2006.
Right.
We're going to have anywhere from 0, according to this series, all the way up to 421,000. So we have a lot of variability. Our economy is noisy. Our economy has ups and downs. On a broad brush, though, our economy seems to be on a pretty even track.
Okay.
Now, you may notice early on that we have some lower numbers of jobs added in the spring and summer of 2012, or the summer,
right.
Spring and summer of 2012. Mm-hmm. Those might be noticed if you're trying to look inside this noisy series, and that's something that people do. And sometimes you can attribute pieces like that. There are 8 data values down there below the 206. People attribute that to, hey, there's something in here we need to understand, and perfectly reasonable thing to do.
Okay.
What is really interesting to me is the number of there's a second graph here called the moving range, and economists use a lot of moving range or moving average numbers. What we're doing here, the moving range is just simply how different was one number to the next.
Okay. In this case, 1 month to the next.
1 month to the next.
Okay.
So what we have is the month-to-month change on the average is just under 80,000 jobs. Now you think, oh my God, that is huge. In a way, you're right. The average amount of change month to month is just under 81,000 jobs. And in an economy as big as ours, that's not necessarily a huge proportion. But when every individual is either out looking for a job or afraid of this, those numbers can be really scary.
Mm-hmm.
So understanding that our economy is noisy enough and volatile enough that on the average from 1 month to the next, the change in jobs added can be just under 81,000 is something for us to figure out how to process. What does that mean? How do we understand these numbers from 1 month to the next? Because I'm not talking about just how do we understand the latest number, the 313,000 added. I'm talking about how do we understand our economy.
Okay. And so just from the previous conversation about the run of 8 between, I'm going to say the summer of 2012 or the summer of 2012,
yeah, right.
What we're looking for now is either a point outside of that upper control limit or some test that basically says a run of 8 above 206,000 if, for instance, the tax cuts and the for individuals and for corporations that we're going to see reinvestment. The theory, again, from a previous video that we recorded, is that we're waiting for evidence that these tax cuts and these corporate tax cuts too are going to increase our 206,000, that we start to see a run above that.
Yeah, if we do have, and given the noisiness of something like this particular series, the most likely way we will get a signal from a statistical standpoint that we do have an increase in numbers of jobs added is a steady situation, that we continue to have more than 206,000 jobs added for 7, 8, 9, 10 months in a row.
Okay.
If we came up with 230 jobs or more than 210,000 jobs added a whole bunch of months in a row, we would have a sense that our economy had definitely moved up, even if we don't have a number that jumps outside the 421,000.
Okay, so let's just hypothetically, just because I think it's interesting, is if for instance next month we had 450,000 jobs added, what would that tell you? How do you see that?
If we have a number that goes up above that 421,000, 430,000, 440,000, what that says to me is that something has happened in our economy that is a phenomenon well outside of what's been going on the last 5 years.
Okay.
And the question then becomes, what is that phenomenon? How do we understand that phenomenon? What can we do if we love the fact that we're adding so many jobs? What can we do to perpetuate that kind of situation?
Okay.
And the other thing is, and these numbers, the jobs added and the unemployment rate that we'll look at in a minute, these are 1 or 2 dimensions of the economy. And I honestly do think that it takes looking at several of the dimensions of the economy to decide, are we in the right place or not? Because we're in a global economy. We can't just look at the number of jobs added and know what's the best thing that's happened. What is really best for our U.S. economy? Okay.
And so if we did get a 450,000, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to stay there either.
That's right.
It may be just a 1 month blip that then it may go back to the average that it had. There was something we'd have to track down what had happened that particular month.
Yes.
Okay.
And we have had that kind of thing happen. Back in 2010, there was a data point that went up over 500,000 jobs added and then bounced back into, and that 2010 number was as we were beginning to climb out of the recession. And it would be interesting to know exactly what it was that contributed to that 1 month. The more we can understand what contributes to a particularly unusual event, the better off we can understand our economy and how it behaves.
Okay. All right. And what's the third chart we have?
Well, the third chart is that same period of time, January 2012 to February of 2018.
Okay.
In which I looked at the unemployment rate.
Okay. So this would be the percent change in unemployment from.
No, actually, this is not a change. The previous chart was jobs added, which is a change in the labor force count. This particular chart is actually the unemployment rate as measured by the U.S. Folks who and reported in the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is actually the unemployment rate itself, not the change in unemployment rate.
Okay.
And one of the interesting things, the unemployment rate in January 2012 was up over 8%.
Yep.
And you see it steadily going down.
Okay. And it looks like, I noticed you didn't put control limits on like the last 5 points there.
No, I just...
Okay. Is it because it's trending down so much, or it looks like
No.
it may be leveled off? I wasn't sure why you left the control limit kind of there in the middle of.
No, I did that only because I left it the way it was only because there's a phenomenon about analyzing data and looking at the variability in data that can sneak up on you, and not too many people talk about it. The unemployment rate is reported to 0.1%. So we have 4.1 or 3, or,
Right.
8.4 or 5.6 or 4.0. We have a value that is reported to 1 decimal place, 0.1%.
Got you.
And one of the things about choosing by the way, that particular phenomenon is called resolution. That how detailed are the data values to
Okay.
0.1%? That's our resolution. And if you choose to look at the moving range chart down at the bottom, the resolution, that is where you can see almost the jumpiness of the resolution. And you see that the last 5 values, starting October of, if you go up to the top chart where we got the unemployment rate, you see the last 5 values, they actually were all 4.1%.
Okay.
So the difference, the moving range with those numbers is 4.1 versus 4.1 or 0.
Okay.
And then the same thing going for the last 5 months. And you see 4 zeros down at the bottom chart. Those are the moving ranges. One of the things that you can notice about that bottom chart is it looks particularly jumpy. Jumpy being you have 0 change from 1 month to the next, or 0.1% change from 1 month to the next, or 0.2%, or 0.3%. And then at one case, you had a number that indicates, oops, we have a change bigger than we expect.
Okay.
In spring of, it looks like it was
April of 2014, maybe.
2014, yes. We had a 0.4% jump.
Okay.
That would be something that caught my attention and said, wait a minute, what does this mean to me?
Okay.
What I find fascinating down in that bottom chart, though, is the average amount of change. What is the average amount of change for the unemployment rate from 1 month to the next? And the average amount of change is about 0.1%.
Okay. All right. So it doesn't move quickly up or down. Typically, it moves very slowly.
It does.
Uh-huh.
We can have a 0.3% change for just pure noisiness of the series.
Okay, based on that upper control limit of the moving range,
Yes.
we could
right.
expect anything up to 0.3%,
Yeah.
and it wouldn't be unusual.
Exactly.
Okay.
So part of doing these analyses for me is to help me understand when is there something really worth talking about as an unusual event, and when is there discussion just about noise.
Okay.
Because for the vast majority of our world, and I know from the business world and working in a lot of companies, people spend a good chunk of their time talking about noise, which really doesn't get them to good decisions or even good understanding of what the phenomenon is behind what we're doing. So
this is the importance of putting it on an X moving range or an individual's moving range chart. Okay.
How much is just pure chance from one time to the next, based on the data? This is not based on theory. This is based on the actual data we're looking at.
Okay, and this is the reason why people overreact in the media or politicians or whatever. They can basically control their own narrative about what's happening with data if they're not looking at it in this fashion.
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. There's a lot to understand here.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the actual value. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, the two numbers that come out together each month, jobs added and unemployment rate.
Yes.
And I mentioned almost as if they ought to tell us one tell us about the other. Now, nobody is saying that exactly, so I want to leave people off the hook, but these are reported at the same time typically. So I thought, okay, let's look at a scatter diagram of the last 5 years.
Okay.
Of change in non-farm unemployment, or change in non-farm employment, the jobs added.
Okay.
Versus the unemployment rate. Just to see, one's not going to predict the other, but just to see if they tend to change together. If unemployment gets lower, do we get more non-farm jobs?
Okay.
Or if unemployment gets higher, are we losing non-farm jobs?
Okay. And just going from an educational perspective, the correlation coefficient can range anywhere from -1 to a +1.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
The correlation coefficient just gives us a general sense of how two data series might vary together.
Okay.
If they vary perfectly together, one goes up, the other does, you get a +1. If they vary perfectly together, but you have a negative relationship, one goes down, the other goes up. So in between, if you have a 0 or some number close to 0, in our case it's -0.07, which is coming in there close to 0.
Okay. There's no
If
correlation.
Then you really have no correlation.
Okay.
You can look at the horizontal axis of unemployment. Look over there near the 8% point, the 8% mark. And if you look there just to the right of 8%, you can see in some cases there were under 100,000 new jobs added in a given month, and then way up almost over 300 jobs added.
I got it. Okay.
And if you go back now to the area where we are, the 5% area has an interesting deal, somewhere under 100,000 added sometimes and somewhere up over 300,000. At the level right now, the 5 values that we have for 4.1%, we had a month where about 180,000 jobs were added, and we have our month now where 313,000 jobs were added. So they do not predict each other at all.
Okay. So in layman's terms, basically what you're saying is if we have a change in the unemployment rate versus the number of people employed are added or subtracted from the economy from month to month, that these two things are not anywhere in that -1 to 1 on the extremes of those, where -1 means that one would move the opposite of the other. When it moved up, it would move down, and then if it was positive, that they moved up together. That there is no evidence based on these data from 2012 to February 2018 that these move together in any fashion. That they're completely two independent pieces of data.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
That's exactly. They can't eat. Neither one of those can tell us about the other one.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so, Frony, when you look at these 4 things, kind of give me your, back up a little bit. Just kind of, what do you see? I mean, what is it what conclusions can we draw?
One of the things that I find important about looking at data is to find out where I have variability. Data are always going to be variable.
Okay.
But the key thing is, what are the messages in the data? And if I'm going to be listening to people report data, I want to have a context for those data. And as we're dealing with economic numbers, we can have a context that's just a given month. The non-farm jobs added in February is a context for February 2018, and the unemployment rate for February 2018. But that doesn't really excite me a whole lot, because our economy is not going to be, February was not the only time we need to look at our economy. There's January, the previous year, the previous year, the previous year. And many times people will report, in February of 2018, we did this. Let's go back and look at February of 2017 or February of 2016 or February of 2015. A lot of times people are looking at the same time last year, the same time period last year. And I'm aware, from having analyzed data over time for close to 35 years, that the same time last year is not necessarily a good reference point. So I go back and look at all of the data. What's happening as we go from month to month to month? And the fact that the time period 2012, January 2012 to February 2018 represents a pretty stable time period for jobs added overall, the 206,000 jobs added on average from one month to the next, gives me a framework in which to look at data now that come after this particular time. Will we see a number or a period of time that gives us an indication that our economy has changed substantially from this reference period of 2012 to 2018, February 2018?
Okay.
I want to use the data to find out when are things relatively stable and when is there something interesting, different going on, so we can zero in on what was that difference. What is causing our economy to be different than it was?
Okay. All right. And using statistical process control or process behavior charts is a way for us to be able to discern some of the things that we maybe should be reacting to versus what we shouldn't be reacting to.
Picking up on that, Tripp, one of the pieces that I have learned somewhat painfully at times over the last 35 years of using this way of looking at any process or any phenomenon is that we live in a dynamic world. And in this dynamic world, we do have periods of relative stability. When do we have those periods of relative stability? What does it look like? I know that jobs added is a noisy time series, and there may be some phenomenon inside that time series that we could tease out. But generally speaking, they are not enormously impactful right now, based on looking at this individuals and moving range chart. The noisiness in the 1 month to the next values is something that it can cause people a little bit of stomach upset as they look at what's happening. But it's our reality. And if we look at the whole reality as a big picture, then we can begin to say, what are the things that we might notice with, obviously in the past you could see some big changes, and they did impact our economy something ferociously. What is it that's happening that we can begin to understand better and maybe make some different choices?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been a great analysis for people to digest and learn a little bit more about the importance of using statistical process control or process behavior charts, even in their own world, and why it's important. So we thank you for taking time to do this type of analysis.
Oh, you're welcome. Stay tuned for the next story. Bye.